Got it. Hi, good evening, everyone. This is the second session of our AI Thoughts series. This time we're focusing on responsible AI. Uh, just get to that in a moment. Let me just introduce AI Thoughts for everybody. It's a platform to share, discuss, and advise enterprises on the best use of AI. We have about close to 300 participants on this forum, uh, coming from all walks of industry, technologists, leaders in their organization, uh, and data scientists, industry veterans. I mean, who, if you're not a member, go to aithoughts.org and join up, right? And we cover topics in that largely written blogs that cover AI ops, AI processes and security practices, ethics, data science, etc. Uh, our mission is to work with organizations on their AI journey, help them in their AI strategy, as well as in putting in place processes that can help de-risk AI uh, deployment and its use, right? So the whole idea is how do you bring in uh, a vibrant AI center of excellence that builds AI responsibly. That's the whole idea. Okay, so coming to this talk, I think Ravi might say that AI is as old as when he graduated 4 decades back, but it's only recently that it's really caught the fancy of the entire world. Uh, and in that recent short life, it has already been disrupted. So there is already a rapid evolution from what were machine learning to deep learning and now to generative AI or large language models coming in. So when AI did make a decision for you, it is now spewing out output for you in ways beyond imagination. And one of the reasons is that the power of the entire large language models in terms of what they can achieve uh, with the existing compute that's already available makes it a kind of geopolitical tool in the hands of lords. I mean, if you see the executive order that the US is passing, uh, it's uh, it's largely or even moves that the US has made towards controlling chips and its exports to China means that it's considering AI as a source of national power, so to speak, and just that itself is making people nervous about what AI can do and cannot do in the hands of can do both in the hands of good as well as the bad. Uh, and that's leading to a lot of regulation. I mean, the fact that AI makes decisions, sometimes right, sometimes wrong. There is a lot of development that's happening in AI, not just from being simple recommendation engines that you and I aren't really affected by things like Netflix to actually being used in genetic sequencing, in healthcare, in terms of diagnosis, in autonomous vehicles to that extent, in everything from conversational AI, etc. And I think governments across the world are are highly uh, are highly not just I don't think it's scared, but it's probably the issues with respect to how do you control a beast which can invade your privacy, which can create biases and can be used for harm just as much as it can be used for good, right? And obviously, at the end, a lot depends on consumer trust. AI has already been in the forefront where a human can make a mistake and get away with it, but AI obviously can't, and that itself is a challenge that we're facing. Or you can see the headlines every day about how AI failed you in various situations. Uh, or how AI has invaded your privacy, like what OpenAI has done. Well, not exactly privacy, but it's actually infringed copyrights from the New York Times authors who've now begun to sue OpenAI in terms of how do they manage to troll all my data. So the fact that itself that data is yours, it's private, it belongs to you, it is copyright protected, but can be used to train AI algorithms and can and will be used against you is something that is something that's a little bit of a concern from the ethics standpoint, right? There are systems where AI has actually been discriminated, has actually been proven to be discriminating against either women, minorities, in terms of making them eligible, non-eligible, or even invading directly on privacy itself. Areas of concern that are fast yielding. And again, given the fact that now AI has become a lot more ubiquitous, you and I can now touch and feel AI using ChatGPT and other uh, large language models. And that itself gives you a sense of, you've experienced hallucinations, you've experienced what AI can get wrong. While it may in some cases have impacted you, in large cases it probably has not, but it will if made more and more ubiquitous across all the various use cases that AI is looking at. It's come a little to the use cases, and this is the OECD patterns of AI, everything from hyper personalization, which is using your data to give you an experience like Netflix, to recognition like facial recognition, or even medical anomaly detection, so to speak, or recognition of tumors, for example. The fact that it is conversational. So OECD has kind of recognized 7 different patterns where AI systems are used uh, from, and at the end, obviously the autonomous systems are the ones where AI has a little or no, uh, a little less of human control uh, to a large extent. But uh, again, that brings to place as to why there is this need across all of these various complicated systems to bring in responsible AI practices, essentially the ability to mitigate risks. I mean, that trolley problem that I think Ravi alluded to in his last talk about what should AI do in that case? Should it save one life? Should it kill one or kill many as a challenge, right? Which one would it choose? Uh, it's also about then looking at the AI systems and saying, hey, can I actually uh, build trust with my users? In fact, an interesting example is OpenAI, which was just yesterday, the star of LLMs is suddenly finding itself in a corner in terms of its uptake or distrust by CEOs or CTOs who actually say, I'm not too sure about whether I want to go down the OpenAI path. Uh, so everything that it did initially for not for profit, turning into profit, now is also getting itself a little bit of a kickback or pushback in terms of its adoption. Uh, Again, comes back to responsible development of how do you deliver AI systems in a more controlled way, given the various complexities that exist, or that you can put it into place in that, or that you can find it in the use case itself. So all of that is why the need for responsible AI. And coming down to what responsible AI is, it's essentially what we believe a set of principles, practices for the development and deployment and use, so that you develop it with the right set of inputs, with valid data, with permissions, not violating privacies, with models that are then assessed for fairness and bias. And its use is very limited in terms of what it can do and what it cannot do, right? So you're very controlled in terms of what it can do. You put saying that this is what it should do. It won't do beyond certain things. is what you will call an ethical AI application or a responsible AI application. And obviously, there is accountability built into that, which means that, uh, again, there's this whole discussion, let's say, for example, with large language models. A large language model is what it is, but once you use it, the accountability for how you deploy it is entirely yours. And whether you believe that it has been trained right, whether you want to train it some more, uh, you underwrite any consequences of the behavior of that large language model that you have deployed. The fact that outcomes are fair, protecting privacy and also security. At the end, you build things that can essentially cause no harm. Uh, Interesting on this harm situation, OpenAI very recently came back, and I'm not a proponent of either OpenAI or Google, but OpenAI is one of the driving principles of responsible. One of the driving principles, they started off as a non-profit, went into a for-profit, got into all those board issues, and very recently they also said that they would actually use OpenAI for or models for military applications. Google, on the other hand, has a privacy statement that very clearly says that they will not build anything from militarily. Now, at least that's the statement that's there uh, outside and in the public domain. Uh, so I think these are organizational values or ethical values that organizations put on their uh, on the development itself, and on their businesses itself, and build AI systems that align with those values. That is essentially what we mean by responsible AI. Again, if you look at it, a lot of words, I mean, the simple ones like sustainability, safety, security, very much talked about in a lot of situations. Fairness, we talked about use cases of women being denied seniority roles. Uh, how fair is the AI system to that extent? How explainable is it? Can we actually trace the factors that influence AI's decision making? Are they biased towards certain groups, certain individuals? Do they protect privacy as in, or even copyright to that extent, in the New York Times case, or facial recognition systems, which may make or take your facial data, take other data, sometimes make it publicly available. In fact, privacy violations with Aadhaar, at least in India now with the DPDP Act, uh, was one of the reasons why the Supreme Court actually sat down and said, we need to de-link. You don't need to link the Aadhaar with everything, including your mobile, telephony, your bank accounts, etc. So some of those have also been made non-compulsory. While not directly an AI case, it is just a case of how privacy can be intruded upon and to the extent uh, it can be intruded upon. Uh, Lastly, at the end of the day, we have accountability and governance. Obviously, these are the key features that will underpin all of our responsible AI development. Just very quickly, AI, again, not to be discriminating against individuals, and these are when biases get introduced right in the very early stages at the data points itself, the kind of training data that is used to train models, how skewed are they, uh, uh, how 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 representative are they with respect to the to being to making fair decisions. Uh, the algorithms and the models, or the choice of models itself that you use, that emphasize certain features, etc., that itself can lead to biases. And lastly, what human choices and designers can do, right? I mean, you choose data, you develop in a certain way, you influence the decision making in a certain way. Those are what human choices essentially do. Explainability, again, is about how an AI makes its decisions. Usually, explainability is a kind of post facto scenario. It is done while development, but it is when you know the result or an outcome. You take sample outcomes and you try to to create counter dependencies around it and see how those actually match the predicted values, and figure out what how close are those values to what should have been predicted, how complete is it, what features, etc., are prominent in terms of enhancing that or generating those outcomes, and are they sufficient enough to actually to understand why the model made its potential, its prediction, whether right or wrong, right? We talked about protecting privacy. I mean, privacy as a fundamental right now is even recognized in our in our constitution, at least as the Supreme Court interpreted it a few years back. Uh, and it means that the data that is yours belongs to you. You have a right to know how it's used, how it's collected, how it's used, and if it is being used in ways that exposes your information, you are obviously being violated out there. And all of this is about building in those necessary checks and balances into the system, so that when you're actually training models, you're actually trying to make sure that you are not bringing in any information that can potentially be exposed and created. I mean, in fact, very recently, OpenAI has been has been shown, or even some models by good adversarial attacks have been shown to expose privacy and private information of individuals. Italy has now banned OpenAI very recently, and banned it, reinstated it, and again gone back to challenging OpenAI again in court. So one of the few EU countries where privacy, where they've actually taken OpenAI to court and have actually banned the use of ChatGPT in those countries. Again, we come to regulations. I think this sector is getting highly, how would you say, highly evolved and evolved as we speak, evolving with new technology that's coming in, evolving sometimes with the right uh, frames, sometimes with the need to control the proliferation of that technology. Uh, and if you look at across the board, most of the acts that regulatory acts that talk about safety, talk about security, talk about no harm, talk about risk of AI systems. They talk about of protecting individuals' privacy. They talk about transparency, and that's the most important word that comes across a lot of these AI systems. And in the EU, for example, they even talk about a human in the loop, uh, 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 making sure that critical systems do have humans in the loop. So again, depending upon the risk categorization of systems in terms of what can or cannot be released. India, as yet, does not have any AI regulations. There are draft AI strategy papers that are out there and guidelines, but there is no strict AI regulation. I think uh, DP, which is the data protection rights, is digital data protection rights, is probably the closest that has in some way regulated some of the data that can potentially be used for AI, but there is nothing that is very cast in stone. And I think some of the regulations, at least in a lot of the countries, are both in UK, in the US, and in India at this point in time, are those that will be potentially regulated by outcomes in a way to that extent. So that is something that I see happening with a lot of sectoral laws, etc., coming into play to that extent. Uh, but this is something that is an interesting area to watch and to make sure that there will soon be the need to regulate to be compliant to various regulations across the world. Okay, so that was a quick summary of what one needed to do from a responsible AI practice. But what does that mean for enterprises really? I think this is the crux of what organizations really need to do. Especially in large enterprises where AI systems are being either prototyped or developed and being released, there is little or no uh, lines of accountability, so to speak. There's sometimes no AI governance. There is sometimes uh, no real checks on whether uh, first, is there an inventory of all your AI systems that are there? Is there a governing body that's overseeing what AI algorithms are being put in place? Is there somebody that's actually looking at, what can be released? Are they conforming to whatever regulatory standards, etc.? So that clear lines of accountability across the organization, from a governance, from the ability to put it across to different groups. That really is something that should be put in place. Obviously, when you're developing rules with respect to fairness and bias, a minimum sign off in terms of what should be the fairness criteria that one should adhere to, depending on the context of the application itself that you want. And obviously, if it is touching an end user and customer to that extent, then how much more checks do you put in place? I've seen a lot of organizations or development teams in India do something on explainability. I think that's probably a set of tools that were available at one point or available much earlier, tools like Lime, SHAP, etc. But I think this is an area that has now gotten a lot more complicated with generative AI. Uh, but again, through that, there are sufficient amounts of tests. But again, when we talk about testing AI models, a lot of them still treated as AI models as a part of a larger integrated end-to-end stream, as opposed to testing the model itself for both fairness and explainability. Uh, Lastly, in terms of prioritizing data privacy and security, it's something that is now going to take a lot more serious turn in terms of what data does one use, how uh, anonymized, denoised, and or pseudonymized it is, and how is that used in your actual model training? And again, do you have the necessary usage rights, or usage limitations, etc., that apply to it? And again, to build a culture of responsible AI, I think there is a lot more that needs to be done in terms of both training developers, training managers, uh, or making them aware of what AI systems, of what they should focus on when building AI systems throughout. Again, the accountability comes across the board from the designers and developers in terms of we talked about the privacy aspects from data, we talked about bias and explainability. Uh, Data providers, whoever is supplying the data to you, whether you're getting it from third parties, whether you're getting it from internal systems, how representative is that versus how protective or is it of privacy, etc. To deployment teams in terms of understanding what AI can or cannot do. And at the end of the day, making sure that if there is a need to keep a human in the loop. I don't know how many of y'all have gone through frustrating chatbot sessions where you cannot get through to finally a human. I mean, I don't know which app it is, but at the end of the day, you know that where the human is some hidden button somewhere under layers of menus, uh, and there is no way that you can actually get to that. And lastly, for quality organization to set the standards in terms of development, right? We talked about, again, the need for responsible AI coming across all aspects, right from the planning, uh, where you're actually setting boundaries, defining your regulatory constraints, to the design and architecture of the AI models itself, uh, from the explainability and data representativeness to the actual collection of data, the training and the testing. I think not sufficient efforts, my belief is that not sufficient efforts, and I'd love to be proven wrong, are being put into testing of AI models for a lot of transparency and explainability uh, uh, factors. And I think that is going to be a need that will come now, driven to a large extent by regulations also. And lastly, the deployment monitoring, the model drift, etc., to feed back into how the model can be improved and all of that. Anil, one of our colleagues on AiThoughts, Anil Sane, has put together an excellent specific, map of all the frameworks that are actually available from ISO that cover AI from both the management perspective, from the frameworks in terms of how to build, technical specifications. There's a whole lot of standards, guidelines that are available, covering not just building of systems, but also the privacy, security, etc. I think this is an interesting development in a very fast-paced and my belief earlier used to always be that ISO used to be slow, used to be, uh, by the time ISO comes out with a standard, technology has progressed far ahead, or development methods have progressed far ahead. But I think it's interesting in that, again, given the European context and given that Europe is taking a lead in a lot of the AI regulations, that these standards will fall in place. They will get a little more generic. They will provide a certain anchor around which AI systems will be developed in the future. So I think it's a good place to watch, and Anil's been keeping a hawk eye on that, and anybody who wants to get in touch with Anil can do so, and he'd be glad to share his experience on that. Again, governance frameworks we talked about. There are internal governance frameworks. There should be an organization rollout. In fact, I think one of the things that Ravi was very strongly advocating across his various talks is a central AI governance uh, governance, an individual, an AI CXO, so to speak, CXAIO, I don't know if that's the right term, but essentially somebody who is to whom, like a data privacy DPO, like a CISO, there needs to be somebody in charge of all AI systems and make sure that the AI frameworks, guidance, standards, processes, and responsible development goes through that organization. Again, independent audits and assessments. A lot of the regulations themselves are
Yeah.
now asking for that. Sorry, yeah.
Basically, I've written a blog on that. You can look it up in LinkedIn and AiThoughts. And so I've just suggested an organization where both at the risk management CISO level, so basically a chief, basically AI compliance officer at the same level of CISO and the same reporting structure and same amount of independence, like an internal auditor. And then again, initially, basically looking at AI COE and a kind of additional CIO function for the next 2 to 3 years, and then it can merge into regular, basically kind of development, because this is something where huge amount of focus and the governance at the CEO level onwards. So CEO steering as a steering committee member, and the COO, CFO, and CIO, CISO. And so you can look up the blog, and basically these kind of early preparations and then getting ready. There are a lot of comparisons about Oppenheimer moment and all that. A lot of talk, lot of all kind of a feeling when the ChatGPT came. It's been kind of more than a year now, but I think enterprises are very slow. That they are. It is the same technology guys who are still debating about the risk, but obviously the whole feeling is enterprises need to start getting their act together. And that is what is the focus and vision of AiThoughts org, and trying to say how do we basically educate them, and then say that eventually you need to be putting large AI systems into production, touching your customers, touching your suppliers, touching your business partners, and making decisions which will affect the profit and revenue stream of the company. And this is not something where you are going to give requirements, because the AI is going to learn and you have to live in a probabilistic world. And so I think do kind of go back and read the log on AI risk governance. I think the topic I remember is AI governance. And probably Diwakar, you can just go back and repost that kind of blog.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back to you, Diwakar.
Oh, thanks, Ravi. Again, one, the governance frameworks, as Ravi just talked about. The other is independent audits and assessments, and a lot of algorithmic impact assessments. In fact, both the EU to some EU to a large extent, and the US to some extent, especially in the Bill of Rights that they had earlier created, talk about algorithmic impact assessments and being ready with that kind of a data. So it's imperative that organizations do prepare themselves for what I would call the wave when I don't think the choice to be responsible now or to not be responsible exists. I think regulations will ensure that you will need to put in certain controls. You will need to put in certain uh, mechanisms to make sure that or at least make certain disclosures about your models itself. And that itself will lead to all of these things being, the audits, the impact assessments, governance frameworks being coming into play. What we at AiThoughts focus on largely is again from a risk management perspective, risk management, transparency, privacy, regulation. From a strategy perspective, we focus on helping organizations with defining their AI strategies, setting up their AI center of excellence, and the governance mechanisms in place. And again, it's along three lines: training, assessments, and guidance that we provide. And if there is any need, please do feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to get in touch and take that further. I will pause here and and take any questions and try to answer them to the best of my knowledge and ability. Thank you. Okay. How do I stop share? Okay. All right.
Diwakar, hi, this is Varun speaking.
Hey, hi, Varun.
Ravichandran. Am I audible?
Yes, you broke off briefly, but go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for the presentation. Really clear and very nice overview of the entire space and some of the frameworks. I mean, I was just curious. I mean, all of these frameworks at an enterprise level to make sure that we are doing responsible AI and so on. For large organizations in India who are actually trying to tackle this with actual teams and people and so on, I mean, one aspect of it is having a framework in place, having a process in place and so on, and complying to it. And then there is the additional aspect of actual expertise in terms of AI algorithms and knowledge in terms of, I mean, what actually could go wrong and so on. I mean, I'm trying to articulate the question. I think I'm struggling, but I think the question is there a risk that, I mean, people will comply and do a checklist sort of compliance and say, okay, we have a team staffed for this, we are doing this A, B, C, D, E. But when an actual problem comes up with AI, I mean, they might not have thought of all the nuances. So, I mean, how do you think of, I mean, the way that will evolve and mature over the years?
Hey, thanks, Arun. Interesting because I think, like with, I mean, keep AI out of the picture for a moment, right? I mean, if you look at regular development teams had test teams that were associated with it. You had audit teams that are part of the organizations that validated whether the tech, whether the tests you were doing or whatever the process you were following is right or not. With AI, at least at one level, earlier testing teams were just focused on outputs and outcomes, right? I mean, they were just looking only at if I put this model in place, if the outcome, whatever it predicted, how did my application as a whole react? I think there's a difference between what is going to be looked at even from a requirement or even it depends on the market, right? If you're selling your product into Europe, then you had better evaluate who your algorithm is touching, to what extent is it touching, and how are you covered on all of the EU regulations with respect to the EU Act, for example. Then you have no choice but to put in certain processes in place that it's a part of your job description, so to speak, or your work description or statement of work, so to speak. It will need to be put in place irrespective of whether you like it or not. The same is true, for
Right.
example, with privacy, right? In India now, uh, uh, people are scrambling to figure out are they DPDP compliant, because the fines are not light. It's up to 250 crores, right? Uh, and that is a significant amount of fine if you want to be privacy compliant. So at the end of the day, you are going to be looking at, hey, am I getting data? Now, when people call me up, I say, how did you get my number? Where did you get my number from, right? And it becomes a conversation, and they have no clue how they got it, right? They're just acting on behalf of somebody. But you can actually go back and find out why did they even give your number to somebody else, and you can potentially start a class action suit, or so to speak, the equivalent of that against those organizations, and get away with it also and get some money. So I think in some cases, regulations will demand how you do it. In some cases, you will need to do it depending upon what you might perceive as risks from your AI systems, right?
Okay.
See, a Netflix type algorithm may not break too many hearts, right? Even if it fails once in a while. But a doctor dependent on diagnosis, on AI for diagnosis and telling you have cancer versus not having cancer, right? I mean, and that may cause a different kind of an issue.
Right.
So
Exactly.
so I think it depends on the industry. It depends on what your use case is, and I would strongly. I mean, I'm not. My career started off somewhere from development to quality and processes, but I'm not a fan of over engineering processes.
Got it. Yeah.
So
Thank you so much. Thanks, Diwakar.
Hey, Diwakar, good morning, good evening, Ramesh Gupta here. Nice to meet you after a long, long time. I'm in US, started with HPS, so maybe 20, 25 years after I'm listening to you. But it's a very, very good presentation, really, really liked it. I missed some initial part of it. Is that, I see your recording. Is that something you will be sharing the recording or
yes,
posting
we'll
somewhere? Okay.
share that, Ramesh.
Okay, good.
Uh,
Good. So the question actually, such a fascinating topic, and leading to compliance, leading to risk assessment, risk management, and that sort of thing. So, do you think at the end of the day, it's going to be an extended part of like cybersecurity sort of thing, and the way it will be managed that way? After I mean, here in US, I heard just yesterday that there is a task force under NIST. They are developing standards and guidelines around this. And they have pretty much very, very good guidelines around cybersecurity, risk management and that sort of thing. So, do you think ultimately these are going to be a part of that thing? And the second part of the question is, uh, AI actually adversaries or the attackers, they are using basically in a very similar way to attack any enterprises and things like that. So from that perspective, where you see the things are going?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your second question very clearly, Ramesh. I
Yes,
got the
so
first one.
so AI is also being extensively used these days by the cyber attackers in terms of any cyber attacks or any adversaries and things like that. So from that perspective, how the enterprises are preparing themselves to put the things and the guidelines in place to counterattack that.
Okay, I'm not sure I still follow your second question, but let me take a stab at you mentioned
Sure. Okay.
NIST. So NIST
Mm,
is definitely one of the things that the US Act recommends. So if you look at the
mm,
executive order that has the AI Bill of Rights that are there, they highly
mm,
recommend following the NIST framework for putting in place uh, against which your AI system should be evaluated or should conform to. So
mm,
NIST guidelines are definitely top of the line. A lot of people are following it. A lot of people have taken that as a basis.
mm,
And I mean, that's just one of it. There are other things like OECD privacy principles, the GDPR itself that talks about data privacy, etc., that are also being that's also coming into play. Uh, so yes, so you will see uh, uh, governance frameworks or even development frameworks or even regulatory frameworks moving towards those NIST guidelines and frameworks that are being put out there,
I
Ramesh.
think
and you
if
think ultimately
I
it will
may
be
add, yeah,
sorry,
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No.
No, I think that these two things are connected. The earlier question,
Mm,
while these guidelines are there, for example, there was a news about 3 months back
mm,
where there was a theft in a supermarket, and there was a CCTV camera, and that particular county in US has put in an AI image recognition system. So the cops came in and arrested a 8-month pregnant black woman. And the
yeah.
theft happened about 3 days before, so that she was basically 8 months pregnant, and the thief has jumped the fence, etc. And then she won't have even able to do. And when the kind of police realized also, but they said as per process they have to arrest, they have to take her to the police station, and then only the senior officer can decide. So
Mm,
obviously, when suppose you are going to write a non-AI based system, nobody is going to put a logic. If there is a black woman and then suspicion is higher percent, obviously nobody is going to write a bias code in the non-AI regular kind of software development. But by providing the training data which is more biased,
mm,
we are making what is called the false negative, false positive, and these kind of errors which come in. And for law enforcement kind of systems, the very important to look at the training data, to actually go there and say what kind of training data, how many training data you use, where did you get the images from, and did you use synthetic data, because huge amount of research is going on in creating synthetic data images. Many of us are
mm,
familiar with kind of creating customer number, let's create a new account number, etc. in the banking system. A lot of synthetic data. But how do you create synthetic audio, synthetic natural language,
mm,
synthetic video images? And so you have to make sure that there are racial profiles, there are enough. So the higher weightage is not given to a race of a person, and there's a little bit
mm,
match on the face. And imagine if you are standing in JFK immigration counter, and
mm,
then they look at your face and say, no, there is a red flag, and please go to the other room. And so there are ethical issues coming in terms of how you are going to handle false positive. So it is wrongly identifying a person as a thief or a undesirable alien to come into the country. And obviously Diwakar talked about what should be kind of less harmful. Finding cancer and not telling you have cancer, or telling a patient who does not have cancer, you have cancer. So these and all these decisions are taken not by the developer, not by the enterprise who is paying for the AI software. It is being learned by the data. And so obviously this is going to require, that is where he said we should not get into that superficial ticking of box. A lot of organizations, when the ISO 9001 CMMI came actually in India many years ago, all IT service organizations. In fact, I went to a CMMI high 4 and 5 organizations, and 90% of them were Indian IT service organizations. And rest of them are really the people who develop into NASA and the US Defense Department, etc. And so the checklist approach should not be there. I think one needs to look at and say, what are we deploying? Is it going to decide yes or no for a home mortgage, which will affect the life of a person? If a person cannot get a home loan, the person cannot buy a house. So it should be fair. It should not be biased. And if the system rejects the loan, then he should know, that person should know that if I get a promotion in my office and if my salary goes up by 30%, then maybe the bank can give me a loan. So these are the kind of things they need. You cannot tell, we don't know anything. It's an AI system. It says no, it says no. That is the explainability part. And so lot of relearning, both from the development team and from your Diwakar is going to be the team to say, to ask the question, do you have, how many records you have in training data? We have 1 million photos. No, not enough. Where did you get them? What is the racial profile? And does it representative sample? And so, and how many false negatives are coming? How many false positives are coming? And present it to the management, the CEO, and say, are you willing to take the risk? And it's up to you to take the risk and then put it into production. So, but what is now happening is, if there is a very high false positive, and the CEO or COO or whoever is senior guy gave a permission, then later on, if there is a lawsuit, they will be liable because they knew the risk and they still took it. And so the regulations are putting a lot of pressure. But I think that both from the development side and from the risk management side, that they need to be asking lot of new questions, which we never used to ask before. Because requirements is there, and the software will do what the requirement says. Now there is we have requirement, but we don't know how the requirements are deployed.
So basically the outcome of the system mainly depends upon the data set,
Basically
training
data,
data.
and it is more 80% data, 20% quality of the statistical algorithm or the neural network model.
Very well said, Ravi. Really, I'm really fascinated with the thoughts you have. So, and Diwakar, you were asking like the second part of the question. Actually, let me just tell you, just earlier morning today here, I was hearing one cyber security podcast, and there they mentioned one of the adversaries, there was no actual attack, but they created a fake data through AI, and they were asking ransom to the company that we have stolen this data, we have this successful attack, I have this data, and I'm going to publish to the dark web if you do not pay me ransom. So that was, I think that's a kind of connecting to what Ravi was telling, that even creating the data through AI again depends upon, the motive and things like that, and how best you can use it, right? So all of those ethical things comes in the picture.
Right. And again, there needs to be, again, training data. This is one of the things that recently was doing something on privacy. You realize that how the data profligates across the organization is something that you sometimes have little or no control. And sometimes a lot of authentic data is lying on people's desktops. So unless you can control how you can, and whether it's fake or not, right? I mean, it's not even anonymized sometimes, but it still lies on individuals' laptops because they're writing their own small algorithms or testing their own small algorithms. So I think that is where a lot of control in terms of what data you share, whether that then comes the other challenges of representativeness, etc.
So it looks like a lot of governance around the data set or training data set has to be
Yes.
there.
Yes.
And as Ravi said, has to be, senior management has to be aware what kind of data is being used for training that model, which is ultimately going into the production. So yeah, they should be
So in one
responsible
way, I
for
think
that. Yeah.
Europe took a lead in that with GDPR
Mm,
some time back.
mm,
So you will find less of that uh,
mm,
of that in with people who deal with European clients, but
mm.
US, India, I think your data, you don't know where it is, right? Even the organization probably doesn't know where it is at this point in time. So anything that
That
you
will be
give
a
out or put
problem.
out, you assume it is
Mm.
compromised.
Yeah, in that way, in fact, yeah, EU, GDP, through GDPR and many other regulations, they are much, much ahead of the curve. So, yeah, very
Yeah.
true.
Well, thanks for that. Anybody, any other questions?
Yeah, Diwakar, this is Ravi Shankar here.
Yeah, hi.
There is a catch-22 situation. See, for example, we have identified some of the use cases where we wanted to do some sentiment analysis, and we wanted to use OpenAI ChatGPT to do a sentiment analysis on the sales side or some of the customer perspective, customer emails or customer feedbacks. The biggest challenge what I'm getting here is the pushback from the legal team is since we have not assigned it, data processing agreement with the OpenAI, and there is no guarantee that there is no legitimate interest, and then consent has been provided by OpenAI. In that situation, what happens is I'm getting a pushback. So, any thoughts around that? How to, because a lot of use cases are dependent on OpenAI.
Sometimes it's like bringing a machine gun to the party, but then it's if OpenAI is the route y'all have chosen to go with, at the end, I think there are two things. If it's just pure sentiment analysis, then there are ways that you can anonymize that data. You will need to look at. I mean, legal is right in the sense that given the current laws that are there, if this is an India context or if it's a European context.
No, it is Europe context.
If it's a Europe context, then there is a lot more that you will need to put in place to make sure that you are stripping the data of any identifiable personal information. So maybe you need to go back to your legal, or maybe you need to go back to your privacy groups to find out what is the personal information that is there within the data that you want to. Because I mean, you can say gender, you can say you don't need to give a name, or you can give an age. You don't need to give any other identifying marks in terms of how you build your data set that you can put into a OpenAI if it's for sentiment analysis perspective, right? You will need to work with legal to strip it out of whatever personal information that is there that they will agree with and say, okay, now with this we are compliant with uh, with uh, UK GDPR laws. But that is something that you will have to work with.
Basically, data anonymization is going to be whenever you take the data you have obtained, which is your customers' feedback or your customers like call center audio files. So you want to know what kind of problems customers are calling. So anything to do with your customer and your data generation, and it could be that feedback from your website, it could be public domain, but it is your website, then our recommendation is exactly like what Diwakar said. We have kind of looked at even the commercial agreement with OpenAI. They basically say that they're not responsible if you get into trouble, because and by giving this additional kind of data as a prompt, or say even prompts, a lot of discussions on prompt engineering. And what people are saying is they're taking all the text from your sentiment, your customer data, and kind of feeding it into ChatGPT and say, learn from this.
Yes.
And what happens is, then once you get the output, you've given away the right to the input, basically to ChatGPT. That is their commercial agreement, saying, don't tell me what happens to it. Because it gets into one node of this $175 billion neural network, which nobody can retrieve anything. So it's a black hole. And so only way which we are recommending is, when you are going out, even if you are licensing a commercial or an open source LML outside, or a vision model, or an audio model, or a natural language engine, whatever, don't let anything get out. There is a firewall in your enterprise. Anything outside the firewall is anonymized, and that is approved by your CSO. And what I recommend is a chief AI officer, the CIAO, and they say, okay, nothing is going out which has got any resemblance to customer name or social security number or citizenship number in various countries, whatever it is, and it should not have personal information like the home address, etc. And those rules are very clear through GDPR, exactly what is. And so you are more interested in basically using some encryption, decryption, because you may want to decrypt back to can match it with your customer database. And so there's a lot of work. Unfortunately, what happens is that in the pilot stage, people forget about this work, and then say that they immediately develop a pilot in a week's time, and they show it to their kind of chief marketing officer, and then everybody is jumping up and down. But when you want to launch it into production, everything stops.
Agree with you, Ravi. Completely agree with you.
So only this and your risk management kind of principle, strategy, and getting it in the early start of the project. So this is what Andrew Ng calls it as basically pilot to production paradox. A lot of pilots, a lot of euphoria, but nothing is going into production because people don't budget for it. And then somebody says, I need another $500,000 for data analysis. And then chief marketing officer says, what do you mean? You asked for $250,000 for the AI model. Now we are asking double the money for data compliance. So the total cost of deploying will obviously go up, but once you identify your data anonymization tools and all that, you can replicate. So it is, and obviously the foundation or the foundation in the AI COE for large enterprises to launch multiple sets of your AI projects. Unfortunately, that it is going to cost some money. I don't think you can avoid some expenditure. And then you will reap the benefits by deploying more and more apps into production.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree. Thank you.
Thanks, Ravi. Okay. I think anyone else? If no, then thanks a lot for your time. I hope you found it useful. We'll share the recording shortly, put it out into the various groups that you were part of so that you can get a link back to it. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate your time and your questions and your patience.
Thanks, Diwakar. Thanks, Ravi.
Thank you, Diwakar.
Thank you all. Thank you all on behalf of AiThoughts.org. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.